This is the My Campaign Coach podcast, where we talk about how to win elections. Every week, we let you hear straight from the best consultants, operatives, and candidates in the game, all for one reason, to help you win. For more information about how we can help you win, visit mycampaigncoach.com. Now, here's your host, Raj Schaefer.
Welcome to the How to Run for Office podcast from My Campaign Coach. This week, our guest is Cathy Scott. She describes herself on Twitter as a conservative Aggie fighting for a stronger Texas and a joyful follower of Christ. Frequent listeners should remember hearing Cathy mentioned in both the interviews with Senator Konni Burton and Luke Macias. She worked for both of them as the campaign manager for Conni's 2014 state Senate campaign and did an absolutely incredible job through a tough year and a half on the campaign trail. While Cathy had extensive volunteer experience on campaigns, she'd only held one other political job before her post as manager for Conni's race. What she may have lacked in experience, though, she made up for through her tenacity, curiosity, and work ethic. I'm hoping that y'all will listen very carefully to our conversation today because I believe Cathy provides an excellent example of someone future campaign staff should strive to emulate and the kind of manager future candidates should look to hire. While she's not working in politics at the moment, it's impossible for Cathy to totally give it up. Right now, her full-time dedication is raising her 14-month-old son, Truman, and preparing for baby number 2 to arrive in early August. She's been married to her husband, Cody, for 3 years and currently lives in Houston, Texas. Cathy, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, Raz. I'm excited to be here.
It's a pleasure, as always. We got to spend quite a bit of time around each other during Conni's race and get to know you beforehand. And it's very sad to all of us up here that you're down in Houston now. You're not in the DFW area, but we know you're doing some good work down there and excited for Cody and his job. Let's start out by starting out where you started, kind of talking through your personal history. I know that you had originally, for most of your life, looked at being an elementary school teacher, and somewhere along the lines, you got bit by the political bug and kind of shifted course a little bit. So talk us through your evolution and how you got started in politics.
Absolutely. That's exactly how I would describe it too. So my dad's a pilot, and I have always heard my whole life that at some point, if you become a pilot, you get bit by this pilot bug, and then you just can't give up flying, and you always have to fly. And so I think that definitely happened for me. So background, I grew up in just kind of your middle America family down in San Antonio. My mom was pretty politically active, but not really in the sense of calling legislatures. She was very pro-life. Both of my siblings are adopted from the Gladney Center, and so that causes something near and dear to her. And so I remember being 4 or 5 years old and going down to downtown San Antonio and standing on a street corner and, holding signs with her. And I actually remember a radio host at the time interviewing us because she brought her daughter down there. So I just grew up with that mentality in our household, knowing that we can make a difference in the world of politics and just in the world in general. And so continued to grow up, graduated high school, probably since the time I was like 3 or 4. I knew every time someone asked me what I wanted to do, I wanted to be a teacher. That's what my mom was. There's a lot of women in our family that have been teachers, and so that's what I studied at A&M. And freshman year, I just started to kind of pay a little bit more attention to what was going on in politics. And then sophomore year, I had the opportunity to study abroad in Tanzania, and that actually was very eye-opening for me because we took a class in political history of East Africa, but also all of the other Americans that I was with were completely on the other side. And so it was a really, really good eye-opening time for me to see what they believe, really kind of get into the nitty-gritty of it, because going to A&M, going to a private Christian school, growing up, being surrounded by my Christian conservative family, that was just, completely eye-opening for me. And so they really challenged me to figure out what I believed in. And so I kind of came back from that trip fired up about politics. So I think right after that, I started working for a new conservative think tank up in Dallas during the summer. And then that next year, I was actually down in San Antonio over Christmas break and this guy knocked on my door, and I opened it, and I had just been paying attention, and it was Matt Beebe. And he was running against Speaker Strauss for his first, Matt Beebe's first race in Texas politics. And he opened the door and he said, "Hi." And before he could even say his name, I said, "Hey, you're Matt Beebe."
That was probably the first person who had that reaction.
He was. And he actually said that I was probably like the first or second day that he had been block walking. So nobody even knew who he was.
That's awesome.
So a couple weeks later, I gave him a call and said, "Hey, I'd love to volunteer for you." And that's kind of what got this ball rolling. So I started volunteering for him, and then was doing a great job, I guess. I just kept showing up and working hard. And he said, "Hey, I'd kind of like to hire you, but I need you to talk to this guy, my consultant. His name's Luke Macias." And so I had no idea who that was at the time. So we had a little phone conversation, and then I think they hired me on at some point as the volunteer coordinator, and I just had a blast. I loved every minute of being able to work on that campaign, even though we didn't win, but it was fun. That summer, I had the opportunity, which was incredible, to go to the RNC, kind of as part of Senator Rick Santorum's staff, and so that was just a really great opportunity as someone who is young and engaged, to be able to be so behind the scenes, going with them to every interview, helping with, all sorts of meetings. It was just a really fun time. So that just continued to spur me on in this direction. And so I did graduate from A&M with a degree in elementary ed, interdisciplinary studies, and actually at our wedding, at this point, Luke and I had become pretty good friends, and, we were at the reception. I was walking around saying hi to everyone, thanking them for coming, and Luke, being Luke, walked up to me and was like, "Hey, Cathy, I know we've talked about this, but you're about to move up to Dallas, and that lady I've been telling you about, Konni Burton, she really needs some help." And so I was like, "Luke, let me get married tonight. Let me go on my honeymoon, and then I'll talk to you some more." Little
did you know when you had that first conversation on Beebe's race how much trouble Luke Macias would get you in.
Isn't that the truth? So, I got back. I thought about it for a little bit, and that brought me to Konni.
Very, very nice. Well, before we start talking about Konni's race, let's go back to Beebe's race, because this was your first time being heavily involved in a race. You had obviously been paying attention, otherwise you wouldn't have known who Matt was and what he looked like. And so now you're jumping in first as a volunteer, and then get hired as a volunteer coordinator because you worked hard. What did that look like? Because you're on the ground. It's a tough race. You knew that was. You were going against the Speaker of the House, and it was a race that a lot of conservatives across the state have put a lot of attention on. But you knew you faced an uphill battle, and that you guys were going to have to work really hard, and it was largely going to be up to you guys to show that Strauss is vulnerable, that there was another option. What did you do as a volunteer coordinator to help harness a lot of that grassroots energy and try to get doors knocked and phone calls made into that district?
So that was it was definitely a challenge, because not only were a lot of people in that district just unsure of who this Matt Beebe guy is. He was new to politics. He had never run for office before. He didn't have great name ID at that point. But on the other side, Speaker Strauss, Representative Strauss, his family is very, very prevalent and very prominent in San Antonio. And so the people who, not all, but a lot of the people who would, support Matt were just afraid of, well, my daughter goes to school with his kids, or my friend is friends with him, or I'm friends with his wife. And so, lots of times people didn't want to publicly come out, but we also had the flip of that. And we had people who were really, really excited to, for the first time, have somebody that they felt could be different and make a change and speak for their conservative values. So we really just tried to build on that. We had a lot of the homeschool community come out from San Antonio and really support us. We had great turnouts block walking and on our weekend block walks. And then we also had a lot of people come in and volunteer to phone bank during the day. So it was definitely hard work. We fought tooth and nail. We were block walking every day, every weekend. And when we weren't block walking, we were trying to go stick, reminders on people's doors to just remember, hey, remember voting's next week, or remember voting's today, or picking up the phone and making more phone calls, or putting out signs. So it was definitely a challenge, obviously, but it was a great, great, great first taste into what the real campaign world looked like.
Well, and that obviously not only gave you a ton of experience and helped you understand what it would be like to run an underdog grassroots campaign, but it gave the people like Luke, who would be making hiring decisions on future races for his clients, and a lot of other people in Texas politics, it gave them a taste for who you were and allowed you to prove your loyalty and your work ethic to them. And that was, we talked about that a lot on this podcast, how incredibly important that is. And I just love having somebody like you on here that's such a perfect example of that, because you really took an opportunity that literally showed up at your door and, met Matt, impressed him, and are a good example of how that reputation builds and how those future good opportunities come to folks who are willing to put the work out there. And I think that's obviously speaks very well of you and your work ethic.
Well, thanks. I tend to be someone who, if I get started on something, then I really want to commit to it full-fledged. So I think that's probably a good part of why that happened.
Well, that continued, not just in Matt's race, but going around, getting the cool experience of getting to go work for Santorum at the RNC in Tampa. And then, of course, Luke badgering you at your wedding about coming to work for Konni. So I want to set up a little bit about Konni's race, because it's a little bit of context helps here. So in 2012, there was a race to beat Wendy that had failed, and it's the SD10 is about the only swing district here in Texas. Every other district is cut pretty heavily for one party or the other. So it's the only true swing district in Texas. Happens to be the one that I live in. And so I was heavily involved in the general election in 2012, and the candidate was deeply flawed. He turned out to be one of Konni's primary opponents, and so he lost that general election. Going forward from there, we're in the process of redrawing legislative maps, and we have new districts. So Wendy's having to run again, which is normally a every 4-year affair, but she had to run again right away. And in the early part of that session in 2013, Konni jumped in as into that race. That was very early. Most people don't start jumping in until between June and September.
I think it was March or April that she jumped in.
Yeah, it was very, very early on, in the middle of session, months before anybody else was looking at it. And at that point, it looked like, when he was talking about running for re-election, that was what everybody believed she would do, and Konni wanted to target her for that. And a lot of it goes back to something that's very important to you, and that being pro-life legislation and sitting up for life. And that's something that Konni has a lot of background in. Both of her daughters were adopted, and she shares that passion. And as it turned out, Konni jumps in, planning on running against Wendy. Just a month or two later, Senator Davis jumped to national headlines as a result of her filibuster against one of the major pieces of pro-life legislation that the Republicans were trying to pass that cycle. And so she did a big filibuster, and all of a sudden was on all these talk shows and being blogged about and talked about across all kinds of media outlets and being heralded by the left in a big way. So even then, she was still looking at running again for her seat, and that's when you come on. Pretty quickly after that, she shifts gears and she decides she'll run against Governor Perry for the governor's seat. And now you realize that we're talking about an open primary. So pretty quickly there, you go from being the only Republican in the race to being one of 5, one of which was a previous state representative, had run previously for the Senate seat and got beat. Everybody else has got, some measure of name ID. 3 of the guys had quite a bit. And they're up against Konni, a multi-year Tea Party activist, stay-at-home mom, and somebody that I've known for years, and she's done a great amount of work on Senator Cruz's race and other conservative races. But she's a first-time candidate, you're a first-time campaign manager, and you're thrown into what becomes one of the biggest races that cycle in Texas, as far as not a statewide. Man, what were you thinking? How did you get into that? What were some of those first steps that you guys took?
So in the first few weeks of Luke talking to me about really, really, really wanting me to work for Konni, and then also, after meeting Konni and getting the opportunity to go ahead and work for her, I was just, to be totally honest, a little apprehensive. Not sure if they really understood who they were getting, that, this was going to be my first really big rodeo. And not only that, but it was a really big deal. So I knew that the pressure was on. I really had to prove myself, not only to Konni, but to everybody else, because a lot of people and a lot of money was going to get poured into this and did get poured into this. And so I had a lot of responsibility on my shoulders, and that just kind of pressured me into just going all in again, and just really making sure that I was going to do the best job that I possibly could do. But Konni herself made the race so much more fun. And so like she was able to just win voters day in and day out just by talking to voters, as you know from knowing her. We, Luke had come in and said, hey, if you're interested, I'd love for you to meet her. And so the first step with them, I actually was not hired as the title of campaign manager. I think my first title was field manager. Konni didn't want to bring me on with this grandiose title and then me not prove myself, not do a good job, and then her have to fire her campaign manager and then hire a new campaign manager. So that was really wise of her. So that's what I started as. And we met at a Starbucks for the first time. I think we had spoken on the phone or texted, and we met at a Starbucks, and we just kind of sat down. And I know that she was interviewing me, but in my mind, I was interviewing her just as much, because I strongly, strongly believe that I cannot do my best and work for a candidate that I do not fully agree with, and that I do not stand side by side beside. And so, it was really just a fun opportunity to sit down, meet her, get to know her, kind of get to know why she's running, what her political values are, where she stands on the issues. We quickly related over the fact that both her girls and my brother and sister were adopted from Gladney, and so that was just an instant bonding moment. So it was a slower start. I worked remotely for a little while. The whole race, I commuted from Dallas area, Dallas Richardson, to Fort Worth.
Which for listeners, that's about a hour commute or so. That's not a fun commute.
50 miles each way.
Oh my gosh. That's not a good day, especially for folks who don't understand Dallas and DFW traffic. It sucks, especially the roads you had to take. So that alone speaks highly of your dedication.
It does. So for the first few weeks, so I came on in July, and then through July and August, I mostly just kind of worked from home. I was able to do a lot of phone calls, really do some research on what groups were in the area, kind of get to know the district a little bit more, order some campaign maps of the layout of the district so that I could see the precincts, start figuring out what areas we were going to target. And I worked very closely with Luke on a lot of that, obviously. And then also just starting to make phone calls, starting to talk to volunteers, starting to set up meet and greets. And at that point, it was just Konni and Luke and I and Phil, Connie's husband, who was super, super involved in the entire campaign and ended up being Connie's campaign treasurer, which we all kind of laugh about. I don't know why, but he does a fantastic job. But he is just as much of a part of the campaign as anybody else was.
Well, I think a couple of things you mentioned that I really want to highlight. One is how you were interviewing Konni. We talked with John Drogan a couple weeks ago, and he was talking about how he had that same opportunity with Ted Cruz, and that was something he took very seriously. I know that I really respect that about both of you guys, the fact that it was not just a paycheck. You guys both knew that if you were to be dedicating yourself to this candidate, putting your name next to theirs, that you want to make sure that it was going to be somebody whose votes and policy advocacy would be something that you were proud to be associated with. In both cases, I think it turned out to be very, very true. Your gut instinct on both cases was right. So early on in that race, those first couple months, the senator is out. Wendy Davis is out of the Senate race. You know that other Republicans are going to be jumping in, but you're still early in the summer. And similar to Cruz's race, you guys knew you had to win the grassroots support early on and be known as the conservative in that race. Mm-hmm. And you knew that you're going to be one of 4 or 5 people, turned out to be one of 5 people in that race.
Right.
That was not an easy thing to do. Konni had great name ID among conservative activists there in the area. and especially up in the northeast part of Tarrant County, but large part of the district was Fort Worth, and on the southern part of Tarrant County, an area that Konni did not have a whole lot of experience and hadn't spent a whole lot of time. There was also going to be a lot of folks in Fort Worth that were not going to like the fact that somebody from Colleyville would be representing them as senator. They're very biased towards having somebody that actually lives in Fort Worth. So you set to work nailing down that conservative support and working that really hard so you'd have that edge on the other guys that jumped in the race. Over the summer, you're making those calls, starting to set up those meet and greets. What was your job like at that point?
So my job was to just kind of start getting the details together. And I think that that's the most important job of the campaign manager, is to pay attention to the details and execute. So I started creating a calendar for Konni, and I think that that's another critical part of a campaign. You have to figure out a method that works, and you have to figure out a way that the campaign manager at least can see at all times where the candidate is or is supposed to be, and or what's coming next. And so in today's day and age, we have tons of options for what that looks like. So I just encourage anyone who is going to be running a race or as a candidate getting themselves into a race, you figure out what calendar system that is online, that is shareable, works for you. So that was a big thing that I was doing. We would, I sat down and did the nitty gritty work of literally Googling and looking at the Tarrant County Republican website, and trying to figure out just what is every single Republican club that is in this district? What is every single grassroots club in this district? What is every single Tea Party club or group that is in this district? What days do they meet? What times do they meet? How often do they meet? And then trying to figure out, are they big groups? Are they little groups? What do we need to do if there's 2 on one night? And so starting to figure out those details and putting that together and just kind of creating this is what the next couple of months are going to look like. I was, again, doing a lot of phone calls. I was looking through some emails preparing for this, and it's just funny to, just go back and see, how small the campaign was at that point in time, that people didn't really know who Konni was, and then also people reaching out and saying, hey, I've heard about you. I'm so excited that you're running to take this seat. We need to take it back from the Democrats. And then that person becoming one of our biggest supporters over the next year and a half. We definitely knew that we had a long haul ahead of us. We were in a position that I don't think any other candidate was truly in the state of Texas for that election cycle, because we had to go through what we expected to be 3 election cycles, because we knew that there were, at one point, a couple months in, we knew that there were 5 people in the race. And so the likelihood that that was going to go into a runoff was extremely high. And so we knew that there was 2 automatically. And then because this is such a contested district and we are the Republicans running for a seat currently held by the Democrats, we knew we would have a general election. And so we knew that we had quite a ways to go ahead of us. And so just trying to create some strategies and systems that I could kind of put in place that would be trackable and manageable as we continued to grow. And I just kind of, even though I was not the campaign manager at the time, I knew that somebody would be, whether that would be me or not. And so I just wanted to be able to, whatever I was doing right now, it just needed to be expandable.
Well, and you did a great job taking advantage of the fact that Konni was in early and you were hired early, because that prep time, building those systems, getting to put a lot of thought into what's the best possible way for us to do that. You can't do that when you launch a campaign in September in the midst of a 5-way race. Right. Because you guys were the first ones in, and because you had the summer months to be able to have a slow ramp up, you still had a lot you had to do, but it gave you the time to build those systems and processes. You knew they were going to be important. Sadly, a lot of candidates don't. And that's a lot of what our curriculum at My Campaign Coach, we try to reinforce, is the fact that, hey, before you pull the trigger and jump in, early on in your race, you have to be nailing down these systems, figuring out the right way to communicate with your campaign manager, with your consultant, how to build your calendar, what your protocols are for that, for scheduling, what times the candidate has is non-negotiably off, what times the different meetings are. All those things, they take time, and they're resource intensive. It took you a lot of time, I'd imagine, to nail that down, but doing that early made a lot of good things happen and enabled you guys to have a lot more even keel when you were going through those fall months.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more.
What are some of those other things? I mean, you mentioned nailing down the meeting times and the calendar side there and how you worked with Konni to build a calendar protocol. What are some of those other important systems that you guys identified and you built during those opening months?
I was also at that point just starting to create relationships with some of our vendors that I knew we would be working with, and also thinking through, okay, as these next couple months build up and as we continue to grow, what is, the beginning stages of what is our staff going to look like? Who are we going to want to hire, and in what order are we going to want to hire them? But we had a team that did our graphic design and all of our not social media itself, but our social media graphics, along with a company that did all of our printing and mailing. And so, at that point in time, we were still tweaking our website. We were still adding content to it. Konni was doing just a ton of radio interviews with different radio hosts around the state and also around the county and the district. And so we were trying to figure out, how can we utilize these? How can we plug them into our website? Let's make sure that our push card is perfect, making sure that we are ordering enough but not too many. Just trying to figure out those minuscule details.
Well, and through that, you were also able to figure out your voter contact strategy, what you want to do. You're able to do the research and get your software set up and everything so you knew these are the voters we got to hit. This is how many we needed to hit. You guys ended up hitting, I think, about over 140,000 doors during your entire race. That's not an insignificant number. That takes a lot of volunteer hours and a lot of paid block walking. And so you were able to start laying the groundwork, testing messages and strategies for how you get that done, and starting to learn what the voters reacted to really well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think I mentioned this earlier, but Konni herself is what the voters react to really well. Her message of conservatism, her message of free markets and liberty, that is just a breath of fresh air. But she is a candidate that truly I was just lucky to get to work with and work for, because she is just true. She's true to herself. She's true to her values. One of my favorite stories that I would get to tell new people and new voters as we would get to meet them is they'd say, okay, well, tell me a little bit about Konni. What does she do? What's her job? And I would tell them that ironically, and this was mostly in the very beginning stages, but ironically, she was just super involved. She was the grassroots activist. She was just someone who wanted to make a difference, and she'd been volunteering for years. And she actually started this whole thing by going around the county and saying, hey, we need to find somebody to run against Wendy Davis. Who can we find? She was not at all looking to run herself. And time after time, the finger got turned around and pointed at her. And so I think that, people really resonated with that. I think that also it's a humble person who would be willing to do that and not automatically think, oh, it's me, I should run, I'm the solution to everyone's problem. But also one of my favorite things about her is that she would meet a new voter, talk to them, start discussing issues, and if they said something that she disagreed with, or if they asked her position on a position and it wasn't the same position that they held, she was not about to bend over backwards and agree with them just for the sake of possibly getting their vote. She would sit there and tell them, well, I disagree with you and here's why. And I think that there's not a lot of candidates and not a lot of legislators who do that today. And I think that also really helped Konni and helped her gain people's trust.
Well, she had a lot of experience with that. I mean, for folks that don't know much about Konni or haven't listened to the episode with her and with Luke Macias, you definitely go back and listen to those because it gives you a lot of a flavor for Konni and who she is and her attitude and outlook. But the truth is that Konni had been involved since 2008 or so as really an activist on a very high level. She'd helped start a Tea Party here in Tarrant County and had been incredibly active, volunteering for all these races. She had no inkling or desire to ever run for office. And what you said is 100% true. She was helping try to identify somebody to run against Wendy in the aftermath of the 2012 race when she won re-election. And everybody started saying, hey, Konni, how about you? Stop looking for somebody else. You're the one.
Right.
And thankfully, she heeded that call. She was willing to go through the ringer and did a great job. And talking to voters and telling them they're wrong is a very iffy proposition, right? A lot of people can't do that. There are lots of wrong ways to do that.
Yes.
Arguing with voters, getting mad. There's a lot of examples of people that do a very poor job of that. But the way Konni handled that was not to be like, no, you're wrong, you're wrong. It was to explain. She wanted to make sure that she was going to always have an open book policy with what she believes, and that folks would know that they could come to her with opposition or beliefs that she didn't agree with. She wants, whether it's somebody that's a constituent now coming down to Austin and talking to her, or you or I or anybody else, if she disagrees with us, which thankfully she doesn't disagree with you and I too often, she's willing to explain and listen, and in the end, she's open to having her views changed, but she doesn't take these positions willy-nilly, right? They're well thought out, they're well researched, and because she has that background, because she understands the policy and implications and knows she knows the implication of the principles she believes in, she's willing to have that conversation. And I think that the more candidates we have that are willing and capable of having those conversations, the better our republic's going to be. And she's just one of my favorite examples of that.
And I should clarify that, yes, that is not usually something that I would say candidates should do, is argue with their constituents or their voters. But the way that Konni is able to do it was just very honest. And it really was, I think her heart behind it is that she wants to educate people on, well, but let's really go back and think about this. What implications is it going to cause long term? And I can tell you that probably the first 5 times she did it, I just stood back and my eyes were probably bugging out of my head. And I was just like holding my breath. Oh no, Konni, what are you saying? Please be careful. We need their votes. Do you understand what we're doing here?
Well, and the great thing was that she did, and I think better than a lot of people could have in that situation. She knew that she needed to be able to convince people that she was right and that she was the right person for the job.
Right.
And where a lot of politicians will just simply nod their head and say, that's a really good point. People are used to that. They assume that's going to happen, and they also know that it's BS, right? They know that if they confront a politician and the politician just nods their head and says, that's a really good point. Hey, staffer, write me a memo on that.
Right.
That kind of response is pretty typical of a lot of elected officials or candidates. But what happened in that race was because she was willing to have those conversations and not fight with voters, but discuss why she believed what she believes. And she showed them the fact that these were deeply held principles that informed her policy decisions. Because she's willing to do that, they had a lot higher level of trust. And even if they still didn't agree with her on that issue that they were discussing, they knew, hey, this is somebody that actually believes what they're telling me. They're willing to have a conversation that no one else has been willing to have with me in the past. And I can trust that. I can trust that she's at least a woman of principle that's going to fight for me and fight for what she believes in and do right by our district. And
absolutely,
thankfully that really resonated. It worked, whereas it may not have for some people, for different personality types, and she was able to pull that off. Let's look forward a little bit as you kind of went through that summer. More candidates are out there. Now all of a sudden you're not the only folks showing up to these Tea Party meetings and Republican clubs. You've got opposition candidates there. Talk about that evolution.
So, we definitely made a very, very, very strong effort to be present at absolutely anything and everything that we could be present at. So if there was an event going on, we were there. But with that being said, we knew that for this primary election, we had a very targeted group of voters that we were looking to go for. And so we also, my job was to pay attention to what that target is and make sure that we are only going to events that, are for this group of people that we were trying to get, to win their votes. And so we would kind of focus on certain areas of the district. We didn't go to other parts at this point in time. We did later on as our voter base was expanding, but our eye was just to get to the runoff. And so we were very particular about what events we went to, but at the same time, we were everywhere. And I kind of laugh when you say that, other candidates were starting to show up, because in reality, they really weren't. And I think that was very interesting for us just to see, meeting after meeting, these people aren't coming? They're not showing up. What's going on? Why aren't they here? But on a separate note, as we are starting to show up, I was very aware that Konni was a first-time candidate, and I just wanted to make sure that I was putting her in the best possible position that she could have been in as a candidate. And so I oftentimes attended meetings with her, and I think that for some campaigns that is, people can see that as a waste of time. Why should both of you go to this one meeting if only one of you needs to be there? But I really was very particular about treating Konni with just the utmost respect that I could possibly give her, and just trying to show that to everyone that was around us. And so some people may even hear this and think that's crazy, but I tried really hard to treat her and to treat the race just like I would treat a race that I was running if I ever had the opportunity to, that was, much, much higher, on a much higher level, on a much higher scale. And so I was constantly, if we were at an event, I was constantly aware of exactly where Konni was in the room. We would often meet beforehand, before we went inside, and just kind of debrief, 2 or 3 minutes about, hey, this is this group, this is this meeting, this is what's happened previously, and this is what's, what we can kind of expect. But then once we're in the room, just kind of keeping a constant eye on her, not like a babysitter, but just as, where is she? Who is she talking to? Paying attention to her body language, trying to see if at some point is she getting uncomfortable, or has she been talking to this one person for 15 minutes and, it's really not going anywhere. And now at this point, there's a line of people standing behind him to talk to her. And I don't think I let any conversation go on for 15 minutes, but
good.
But, just going in and being able to step in and move her on to the next conversation, or break up a conversation. As a woman, she always had a purse, and I always had my big purse that had everything in it. And so I always made sure to grab her purse from her and anything else that she had in her hand, so that she could shake hands and give people hugs and, write her phone number down on somebody's note card, or make sure that I was close by and that I had push cards so that people could go to our website, or they could donate, or they could follow her on Twitter. Making sure that I was always readily available to take pictures, because at this point, Konni was kind of a celebrity, and her celebrity status just grew. And especially with the groups that knew her, I mean, she would walk into a room or she would stand up and introduce herself, and people would stand up and cheer, because they were just so excited about what an opportunity they had to get to support her.
Well, most of these folks, because of her years of activism, she was not a strange face around these organizations. While she may not have been attending them weekly or twice a month beforehand, they still knew who she was, because she'd had a very active role. She'd been one of Senator Cruz's most vocal advocates during his campaign in 2012. And she didn't go away. She was out there all the time supporting candidates and helping people out and supporting these groups. And so when you're showing up at these meetings, your work as a staffer was fantastic. I mean, I got to see you work many of these events together. And from my experience working with Senator Cruz and staffing him, I got to see a lot of those same traits that I tried to emulate on this, for my senator's staff. You exhibited a lot of those same ones, the same work ethic, and did a lot of the same things that we did on the U.S. Senate side for your candidate, for Konni. And that made her job so much easier, because she didn't have to ever worry about, hey, where's my phone or where's my purse? You were there to keep an eye on her to make sure that, one, the trains were running on time. She was getting to talk to as many people as possible. But that allowed her to do something that Senator Cruz does a lot as well. And that's that Konni never had to look for the next person to talk to. She was never looking over their shoulder, that she got to focus directly on the person in front of her. That's where she wanted to focus, and your attention to the big picture, your detachment there, being able to look at the entire picture of the event, allowed her to do that. And that was huge as far as letting people know that she was talking to, that they were who she cared about, that she cared about a conversation with them. She wasn't looking for the bigger name or the bigger wallet. She was talking to them and listening to their concerns. And it was your job to make sure the trains ran on time. You did a great job with that. And from the campaign manager position, those are critical things, because some candidates really do like to run on their own, 2 different events, and that can be great. Sometimes it's necessary due to schedule, but where possible, if the situation and resources allow, being able to have more than just the candidate there is great. One, that means you get to talk to twice as many people. that you're able to be out there. You were somebody that everybody knew was associated with the campaign, and your job as campaign manager, folks knew you, loved you. Frankly, they wanted to talk to you about as bad as they wanted to talk to Konni. And so that enabled you to talk to a lot more voters and volunteers in a given setting. And your ability to help really shape the event and the experience of Konni and the voters there made sure that they each got the attention they needed. All the pictures were taken. Nobody was having to take selfie shots that they didn't want to do. They were able to get the autographs, get all the conversations they want to get out of Konni. And that really helped make the voters and volunteers you were talking to feel very special and like they actually mattered to you guys. And
they did. They
Absolutely.
weren't just votes. These people became close, dear friends. They were already a lot of, not all of them, but many of them were already Konni's close friends in certain parts of the district. But it was just so sweet and so humbling for me, even as someone who had just moved to the area. I still keep up with a lot of them on Facebook, and they are just genuinely some of the sweetest people. And they, this whole world of politics, it's tiny, and you just continue running into them. And so they become like another family, just another level of family. And so we truly, truly did care about them, taking care of them, making sure that everyone was always doing well.
Now, you guys, I've already said, knocked a whole lot of doors, over 140,000 doors during the campaign. Some of that was with volunteers. A lot of it was with paid field staff that you guys brought on, or through vendors like myself that actually went out and knocked doors. So you went not only from having only worked one political job before, but now you're actually managing a staff. You had more than 20 people working for you at some points, right?
Correct.
So you've got HR functions, you've got hiring and firing functions, you've got to train these people, you've got to keep them tasked. You've got multiple levels of staff below you that you're having to monitor and make sure all that your goals are being hit, and at the same time reporting all that stuff to Konni and Phil and Luke. How did you do that, and what was that like? Because you had never had employees before. So what was it like, and how did you learn how to do all that?
So thankfully, growing up through high school, through college, I did have the opportunity to be in different leadership positions, which I do think really helped me in this role. So leading and kind of trying to get people to follow and do what we need them to do wasn't a brand new idea to me, but doing it to this extent was brand new. And then also, I was doing HR and hiring and firing and filling out, I don't know if they were W-2s or W-9s. Phil could tell you off the top of your head. Those are things that I've tried to put out of my head.
Yeah, they're W-9s.
But, filling out all of that information, trying to make sure that everyone is on task and doing what they're supposed to do, but also still having the day-to-day operations of running the actual campaign itself, making sure Konni's at events, making sure I'm at events, making sure, voters are getting talked to. If we're phone banking at the same time, doing that, prepping Konni for whatever is coming up, a debate, a forum. At some point we were doing TV interviews, radio interviews. But it was definitely a challenge at times. So again, we started out small. I think it was August, it was probably September, maybe even October, that we hired our first hire beyond me. And I think at that point I stopped being field manager, and I don't really know what my title was. At some point I just kind of slipped into campaign manager. But we hired a young woman named Charity Nicholson, and she did our volunteer coordinating, and she was fantastic. One of the sweetest people that you'll ever meet. And she just, dove in and was really excited to help Konni. And then probably a couple weeks after that, I think we hired 2 or 3 full-time block walkers. And so that was probably around October. And we just really, I was very intensive with them. I was going out and walking with them. I really feel that to be a good manager, you need to be willing to do absolutely anything that you are asking your staff or volunteers to do.
Absolutely.
And so if it was something that I was asking them to do, then I was usually at some point doing it with them. And so, we really sat down and talked through the message that we were wanting them to say at the doors, I had, with Luke's help, the areas that we were really wanting to target in on. And then, just at that point, that was me making walk list. And then also managing and making sure that they were doing what they were supposed to be doing, that they were talking to who they were supposed to be talking to. And I think that it's also really valuable that the candidate themselves is in close communication with all of the staff. I think it's easy to just be in contact with the campaign manager or the campaign manager and the consultant, and then the block walkers and phone bankers and all of them can kind of get swept by the wayside. But to be able to correctly convey the candidate's message, I think if possible, it's really helpful and valuable for the candidate to just kind of have continuous conversation with them. I would oftentimes field their questions, hey, what's Konni's position on this? Or this happened today, how should I respond to it? Or they would call me while they were at a door and ask me what they should say. And oftentimes I would answer those, but I would occasionally bring Konni in to answer those or, whatnot. And we would also have weekly meetings where this happened more so as we continued to ramp up staff. But we had weekly meetings from the get-go that, one day every week, every morning before they went out to block walk, they would come into the office and we would just kind of do a temperature check on, this is how last week went. This is how, we expect this week to go. These are the number of doors we want to get knocked. This is our messaging for this week, et cetera, et cetera. So that was kind of the primary. I think we ended up with maybe 4 to 6 full-time block walkers during the primary.
So what are a couple of those key organizational things you guys did? You mentioned team meetings. What are some of the key things you guys did to make sure all the trains are running on time and everybody was on the same page?
So I think that those meetings were very valuable, and again, keeping Konni in the loop with them. So she would occasionally pop in. Sometimes they knew, sometimes I knew, sometimes nobody knew, and Konni would just show up to our meetings because they were at the same time every week. And so that was always fun. Her sweet, bubbly personality always brought just another level of excitement. Those weren't always our most productive meetings, but they definitely, amped up everybody's excitement.
They have a place.
Kept everybody motivated. So they were important. But yeah, so our weekly meetings, and then we had a continuous group text thread that we used the entire campaign. And I think that was really great because it was and Konni was actually in on it. It was a really great way for the staffers to be able to ask questions as they needed, but also if it was a question that, might affect a lot of people about an issue, then everybody was able to get that information at the same time. And then I was, constantly getting on the dashboard of the campaign software.
Campaign Sidekick.
And so, I was constantly being able to get on there and check to see real-time updates of how many doors they're knocking and how that's going. But then, and I know that you do this too, is I would just show up in the field because I knew where they were, because I made their walk list and I told them where they were going each day. And so I would just show up and just kind of check to make sure that they were doing what they were supposed to be doing. And I would also oftentimes jump out of the car and walk with them. And I think that, and this only continued even more so as we continued to build. But I think, sometimes it's easy for them to see me in business clothes and, in the office when they leave to go out to block walk, whether being a 1.5-year campaign, whether that was in the 102-degree heat or if that was in literal ice on the road some days. So, them knowing that, hey, she's not just sitting in the air-conditioned office with her feet up, talking on the phone. She's actually out here doing the hard work just like we are. I think that really helped just kind of keep everybody motivated and on the same page.
So you've got all those staffers, and you were in charge in large part with hiring them. I know that Luke and Konni were involved there as well, but you had a lot to do with that, interviewing these folks. Some of them were known quantities that you or I or Luke and Konni knew beforehand, but some of these folks had just been active in other campaigns and want to come help. What did you look for in those staffers that helped you figure out who the right people were for those jobs? And then I know you had to let some of them go. Not everybody turned out to be perfect for the job. talk to me about the hiring and the firing side of that.
Yes. So Konni and Phil both had, at this point, put a lot of trust in me. And so at this point, they pretty much said, Cathy, we need to hire X amount of people, and so go do it. And so I would put it out there. We would put it out there on social media. We would, reach out to the Republican Party in the county and across the state. And then we also just had some volunteers that would say, hey, I'd love to be able to do this as a job. So I would oftentimes start with them sending me their resume, me looking it over, usually a phone call and then an in-person interview. In an ideal world, if I could, test all of them out by having them all come and volunteer, that would be perfect, but that's not the real world. So I was, first and foremost, when they would come to meet with me, this is going to sound bad, but I would judge a book by its cover, because I know that as voters are seeing them as this person is coming up to their door, that is a very first impression of the campaign. And
you have to be somebody that's put together, that understands how to comport themselves. And if they can't make a good first impression on you from how they're dressed, the way they're interacting with you, just on a interpersonal level, they're not going to do well at the door, because you only have seconds between the time when the person sees you walking through the door and they open the door to really judge the campaign.
Absolutely. Or if they even open the door because they think that you look sketchy or whatnot,
Yep.
So,
neck tattoos and big old,
right.
Big old 3-inch gauges are not things I want to see in a block walker.
So making sure that they looked respectable, and then making sure that they were able to be personable and hold a conversation, and that they were respectful. And then I also needed them to kind of just talk to me about their work ethic. So I had a list of questions that I had kind of put together that I felt, and I don't have them off the top of my head, but that I felt kind of showed me a little bit more about character and personality. And so I needed to make sure that someone was extremely hardworking, that they were not the kind of people that were going to complain if it was too hot or too cold outside, because in all honesty, I just didn't have time for that. We were, it was a year and a half, which sounds like a really long time, but at the same time, it goes by in a blink. And so we didn't really have time to hire and fire people willy-nilly. If I was going to bring them on, I was expecting them to stay on the whole time. And most of the people that we brought on during the primary stayed all the way through the general election. And I would like to think that we were a fun campaign to work for, and that we respected them. But let's see. So they needed to be hardworking, personable, trustworthy, honest. They needed to agree with our principles and our values and our core values. I also needed them to be trustworthy, because they were coming into the nitty-gritty of our campaign, and this was a really serious campaign. And we knew that the Democrats were shaking in their boots, as they should be. And so we were very aware of them wanting to send like a covert op person over to our campaign. And so we were super selective about who we ended up hiring. And then, as I was continuing to monitor them in the field, I would occasionally notice that people might not be doing what they said that they were doing or what they should be doing. And one of the ways I tried to help keep them accountable was I would always send them out in groups. So I would never send a person to a door by themselves. They would always be in groups of 2 to 4. And usually if it was a group of 4, they would break up into groups of 2. And then they would be like, one person would take one side of the street and the other person would take the other side of the street, or however they figured out worked best for them. But that also helped keep them accountable, because, if you're working really hard and knocking 50 doors, but Joe is only walking 25 doors, you kind of get frustrated and tell Joe, hey, you need to pick up the slack, buddy. So that was one thing that kind of helped nip it in the bud a bunch. But I would also, if I realized that they weren't doing what they said that they were doing or what I expected them to be doing, I would start just kind of keeping track of it and noting it, so that I had proof when I did talk to them that, hey, can you explain this, this, and this? And so I did have to fire a handful of people, and I think my biggest piece of advice about that is just don't burn bridges. As the campaign manager, but even more so as the staffer, it's a tiny, tiny world that we live in and work in, with Texas politics especially. And so, I think I've probably had 10 or 15 of our 20 plus staffers have their next employer call me and ask me what they thought about their job and their work ethic. And so, that can make or break your next job also. Obviously, it's their choice to list me as a reference or not, but even some people who we let go, they still listed me. And so, just making sure that also, with that being said, I had to figure out what was the right level of how much information can I tell them so that I can keep them in the loop and make them feel like they truly are a part of this inner circle of the campaign. But at the same time, if something happens next week and they totally screw up and we have to fire them, they're not going to turn around and go to our opponents and tell them, any big secrets.
It's a tough game. I've had to hire and fire a lot of folks on the block walking side. One of the nice things you alluded to is your ability to monitor, and I'll kind of give a humble brag about Campaign Sidekick at this point. The great tools you had through that software platform to monitor your folks, and there's even better ones now. You can literally see a little GPS snapshot of the door that you were supposed to be knocking and where you were when you entered the data. I've caught people work for other campaigns that were sitting at Starbucks entering data, or were even driving to the middle of a couple of houses and sitting in their car inputting stuff and then driving the next block. There's a lot of cool things you can do to help you, but you've got to be looking for it. You got to be watching carefully, and that was to y'all's credit you did that. It's very, very tough because you can't be sitting there watching on a body cam or something when your folks are at the door. And so since you got to have a high level of trust, but you also have to verify. That's an important component of it. And I think you guys did a wonderful job. Firing people sucks. In my experience, go into it knowing what you're going to do. Don't back down. Think carefully about it beforehand and document your case. And to the folks that are in a position that they're going to work for somebody else, don't work for somebody unless you think that they're going to deal with you fairly. Cathy and Konni were people that I knew would deal with people fairly. But if you don't think that's the case, don't go work for them. If you do, then pay careful attention to how you treat them and what you do for them. Because I know for a fact that if I ever saw on somebody's resume that they work for Konni Burton and Cathy Scott, I'm going to call Konni and Cathy and I'm going to ask them what they thought about them. And if they said they're not worth anything to hire, I'm not going to hire them. And that's the same way in this small world of politics across the world. Cathy, I thank you so much for being here today. It's been a pleasure talking to you and getting to relive a lot of the Konni Burton campaign. I doubt that I'm going to be the only one listening to this, and Luke and Konni will listen to this as well. They say we hope that you have a wonderful time with your kiddos, but we desperately want you back working in politics. We're going to keep trying to drag you back in whatever capacity we can, and I'm hoping to be able to take some more of your secrets and success stories and get them featured over here at My Campaign Coach. Thank you so much for your hard work, and God bless you guys down in Houston. I'll make sure to have all of your contact information, your Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook there in the show notes so folks can reach out to you and tweet at you if they got any questions. Thank you for being on with us today.
Thanks, Raz.
Please subscribe and rate us on iTunes to help spread the word. We'll be back with you next week with more campaign insights from My Campaign Coach.